Hello and welcome to Module 16, focused on student culture and wrapping up the course as part of 641, School District Operations and Leadership.
Hello again, this is Chris Sadler, Director of Human Resources for the Sun Prairie Area School District. Again, I've introduced other slideshows, so I won't go over my past here. You kind of know it, and I left some of the notes up there. But this slideshow is really important because educational philosophy is really about what you believe as a leader and how it plays out in your everyday work. And this quote by John F. Kennedy always kind of sits in the top of my head is that children are the world's most valuable resource and its best hope for the future. And that's really the baseline for my why, is that the kids we work with are truly going to carry our country, our communities forward. And that's why I place so much importance on being an educational leader. And that's why a lot of educational leaders do what we do.
So our focus today will be on building authentic student voice and building strong student culture in your school and district. So why do we even look at student voice? There is an interesting link there that you can check out, but really in the end, research does indicate that students who believe they have a voice in school are more likely to be academically motivated than students who do not believe they have a voice, which obviously ends up connecting to our student outcomes. It does build on the democratic ideal where all voices are heard and taken into consideration when decisions are being made. And the one thing that we do sometimes forget as adults leading systems in schools is that the real voice is from our students. They're the ones that can tell us how we're doing. And they tell us how we're doing in indirect ways through their student outcomes, and direct ways by just how they tell us how it's going. So in the end, if you do provide a real authentic way of gathering student voice and really allowing students to take leads on things, students do show an increased level of effort. It does also show trust, and students begin to believe that they do have the ability to change things or do things better within the schools, and also understand that they have some power within that they can really affect positive change within the building that they spend a lot of time in every single day, or in the district that they spend a lot of time in every single day. So there's different levels of student voice and engagement. There's the macro level of gathering student perceptions around student surveys, really engaging students in council and clubs, school board membership. There are districts that allow students to run and be engaged in student board or school board work as a student member of a school board. And again, I've seen this work really well, where students are sitting at the school board table when decisions are being made, and they're very privy to most information that the school board does, minus confidential employee pieces like in closed sessions. But the one thing that I've always been impressed with the students in this level is that they can really bring a different perception and a different viewpoint for school board members as they're thinking about the many things that they make decisions on. And then there are student action groups that sometimes are led by students themselves, but that's the bigger picture. The micro part is really looking at the classroom level of student voice and engagement, and that's where, as an administrator, and you're evaluating teachers especially, or evaluating your systems on how they support teachers, the classroom is really where it's at. We all know that building student voice in a classroom leads to student voice within a school or district. And there's a classroom video example there that you can check out and just kind of see it in action. But the one thing I do recommend is when you're giving feedback to teachers, really try to look at it from a student perspective, because that gives voice indirectly to students. And then that teacher can really think about it from that level, not just their own perception of how things are going, but actually how it's going from the student perception as well. So I'm not going to go through all of these, but there are different types of voice that you can think about and how this connects with your students. So there's formal, which again, that's more of the macro level. The informal, which is more indirect from school surveys. The instructional part, really looking at how things are done within the classroom, the cultural, when you're looking at how do we really get perspectives of all students, giving us an idea of what the student um, experience is in your schools from every level, and especially through equity work. And then there's evaluative, where students can give feedback on things that either are going to happen in the future or are happening right now. And other pieces here, and you can check this out too in different levels. But the one thing I want you to think about with these tips that are here is, how do you really get student input regularly and allowing them to actually voice their opinions and see action connected to that? Because all of these, when you really think about it, is that students not only want to give their voice, but they actually want to see how it changes things. And most of the time, when you're really honest with them, just like you are with adults and staff members, if you say, I want your opinion, I'm not sure this is going to change things, but it will definitely help, the decision makers take your perspective into account. And sometimes they're going to be able to base the decision off of what you've voiced, and sometimes they aren't able to because of other constraints or barriers. And I think the more students see that, the more like mature viewpoint they see about how they can affect change in a real way within a school system. So connecting back to that again, students are willing to give their feedback, but they need to see follow up. And sometimes that follow up is, boy, we really heard you, but we can't do that because this reason, this reason, this reason. Just like everybody else, they want to see that it's transparent process. It does not always have to go their way. But as long as you can give that really good reminder about why it's going that way, or reason, they can see the big picture and then work towards it in a different way in the future. If you're doing surveys, keep them simple, connected to your strategic plan, create a follow-up plan. And young students can be a part of them too. There's an example there that I use personally as a principal. Getting young students to really see the democratic process again is building their voice from a young age. Sometimes we tend to go with the older kids right away, but young students can tell you just as much. They can tell you a lot, especially in quantitative surveys, that you allow them to see it from their perception. Use questions that are simple and connect with them. And they can tell you a lot to a point where you can change how things are going within the staff. And what's really interesting is really showing the results to staff, because sometimes staff have a perception that, boy, things are going really well or things are going horrible, but the students tell you the opposite. And that's something that is really, really important to pay attention to. So asking the simple question, are you willing to listen when you invite students to the table? Really, in the end, it's just about listening. Because again, students are very thoughtful at every age level. And if they see that people are taking their voice seriously when considerations are being made, they will trust the process and want to be part of it in the long term. And the interesting thing that I see sometimes is kids that get really engaged in providing their voice, when they move on from your system, when they graduate, they actually want to come back and help kids continue to build that voice. Or when they're giving their voice while they're a student in your district, they're thinking about the future, which is such a great connection that leads to long-term student engagement. So a big part of this too is, how does cultivating active student voice promote equity and equitable outcomes? One is, it allows adults to see what is really happening when you're thinking about students of color, LGBTQIA plus students, gender, English language students. I mean, there are so many pieces to this that allow adults to see their schools in a very different perspective, one that may challenge what they actually think is happening. It does allow students to develop leadership abilities and become partners. So it's not just this adversarial piece where a group of students is saying things are not connected to what their perspective is, and they feel disenfranchised. when you bring them in and really listen to their voices and allow them to engage, it produces leadership within them, which then they connect with other of their peers and students, allowing them to have voice and feeling connected to the school. It's got this like trickle down effect in a way, or like a wave effect where it just keeps expanding. Um, and then the strategies that you create then are aligned with current realities. A lot of the times when you sit down for strategic planning, it's a bunch of adults at the table. And a lot of the times they're thinking from their own perception and they're not thinking about the student perception. And the strategies you use might look great on paper, but aren't actually connected to the current reality of what's going on. And one thing you can do to assess your practices is there is a really good tool there from Great Lakes Equity. It's a toolkit for inclusive schools. You'll find that a really interesting toolkit that'll give you an idea of how to like pull that out from your district and school to see like how things are actually going from a student voice perspective and how is it connecting with your actual strategies that you're creating. So within that toolkit for equity, I found an interesting graphic that I think really says a lot about building equity through student voice. So you have the basics of being heard at one level, that's the bigger level, collaborating with adults, which is the next level of engagement, and then finally building capacity for leadership in students is the like the apex of it all. Um, but questions that you need to ask as you go is whose voice is heard? Are historically marginalized perspectives valuable and being used as a way to transform the district or school? Who has opportunities to partner with adults? Again, are all students being able to do that, especially our marginalized youth? And then finally, who has opportunities to develop leadership capacities? So who's sitting at the school board table? You know, are all student perspectives represented somewhere within your system about providing voice? And I think those questions, along with just the basics of being heard all the way to building leadership capacity in students, are the way to build capacity in all students, but also have that equity lens to make sure that those voices you're hearing are truly representing every student in your school and district. So now we're on to the practicum semester overview. So as we go into practicum, there's some really important pieces to know as they come up. You will get more information as you get closer to the actual semester that we focus our practicum on, but I wanted to go over some bigger picture pieces. So yes, we are at the last session. These following slides are really from our first evening or first presentation together. But really, in the end, when you get into this practicum semester, if you haven't already, jump in where you can. There are opportunities everywhere. Just ask your cooperating administrator. So there's a lot of writing on this slide, and I apologize for that. I'm not going to hit all of them, but I do want to talk about a few of them. The first thing you're going to want to do is really start looking at your artifacts. Some of you have already been collecting those. Begin to write abstracts for each one, and we'll talk about what those abstracts should look like here in just a few seconds. One thing you'll want to know is that there are two different pieces, remember. There are abstracts based on each artifact, and then there's a reflection on each standard. So each standard is going to have 3 artifacts, and those artifacts you use to write a whole reflection on that standard. Like, what did you learn? What do you want to learn more of? And what are your next steps? From a logistical standpoint, just want to let you know that your cooperating administrator will receive an email during the last week of semester 2, which is coming up in just a few weeks. This one details their expectations. I also put in resources, an email that I send to supervisors that help them understand what's expected, and I shared it with you so you can see it and see what goes to them. The one thing that I will say is that remind your cooperating administrator to look for an email from Educate or Mariah Kaiser, because that will be telling them how to activate their account, because they have to activate their account and Educate in order to see your artifacts and reflections. A couple pieces is that we will meet with your Educate cooperating administrator and me as a supervisor during the weeks 6 and 7 for your first evaluation. You should have about half of your artifacts and abstracts compiled at this time so the supervisor can look at those, so that's me, and also your cooperating administrator. And then your final meeting is during weeks 13 through 15, and this is where your artifacts and abstracts and reflections for each standard should be completed by. Now, these are just guidelines for weeks 6 and 7 and weeks 13 through 15. If we have it done earlier, great. It doesn't have to be that way, but we do have to meet 2 times according to DPI expectations. Each time, your cooperating administrator should complete an evaluation in 6 to 7 and 13 to 15. They complete this on the Educate website, so again, it's really important they can log in and create their account. You may have to remind him or her to get those done. I found that cooperating administrators are busy and sometimes they'll forget. So you are, as a student, will be driving them a lot about getting things finished. And then anytime there's revisions suggested, please make those as quickly as possible, or change as quickly as possible after each evaluation. So again, the artifacts in the WSCAD portfolio really do provide evidence that you've demonstrated proficiency on all standards, and that's what we use them for, and that's what we use them within the reflection. So 3 artifacts required for each standard. Artifacts will be uploaded during semesters 1, 2, and 3. Those artifacts are results from your leadership experiences, and they must be any type of artifacts like a agenda for a meeting you facilitated or a video you created have to be uploaded into your portfolio. And then if you're seeking dual certification, remember that you're completing 2 portfolios, one for each certification, not just one big one. And then when in doubt, don't flounder along. Contact me as the supervisor or contact Mariah at Educate to help, and then use your resources that you have here. So, what should an abstract contain? Should be about 5 sentences long, short paragraph. They need to show leadership actions. And what I mean by that is action words like facilitated, led, collaborated, co-led, presented. Those are action words, like you were actually involved in the leadership action. You should avoid passive actions like I attended, I researched, or I went to a school board meeting. Those aren't leadership actions. Those are just passive, like I was there to learn, which are important, but those have to be at a minimum in comparison to actually taking leadership actions. And each artifact in your portfolio must have an abstract. It is easier to write the abstract as soon as possible because sometimes you forget the details rather than wait until later in semester 3 to write them. There will be some examples in your resources too to check out just to see how abstracts were written in the past that kind of help you in the upcoming semester. So your reflection for each standard. Now, once you've gotten your 3 artifacts, you've reflected on them, you've told us about what they are and what you've learned. Now you have to look at the whole standard reflection. So you want to make sure the reflection is based on all artifacts, the standard itself, and then your certification area. So if you're talking from a principal perspective or superintendent perspective, whatever it might be, that's included in the reflection. Refer to all the artifacts when you're doing that. Consider what you've learned about your certification area. And reflections, again, as soon as you have all the artifacts in there, I would do your reflection as soon as possible. It's just fresher and easier to write. The reflection, just so you know, is very much like the abstract. It's a little bit longer. I said about 5 sentences for the abstract. I would say for the standard, 10, 15 sentences, just a longer paragraph. Pulling in all the learning that you've done. So again, just a plan for the practicum semester that you can put together. You will need to make appointments for the following, and the student is really driving these appointments. Me as a supervisor or cooperating administrator are not going to be saying we're reaching out and scheduling those. I want you to look at or work with your cooperating administrator and myself and say, here's some times that, I think I'll be ready to present for my midterm evaluation and end of practicum review. So schedule when you're ready. I would say once you schedule the first middle practicum review, just schedule the end one right away, because you can probably do a pretty good job of guessing when that end one is needed and when you'll be finished. This is a conversation. The practicum review is done over Zoom this coming semester. So the cooperating administrator and myself and you look for a time that works for all of us. So provide us with 2 to 3 times. We review the artifacts when we meet. The cooperating administrator completes an evaluation prior to the meeting, and then me as supervisor completes evaluation following the meeting. So again, in the midterm, have about half of your artifacts in there, so the supervisor and myself can do a good job evaluating in that middle part and give you feedback. The end of the practicum review is about 13 or 15 weeks or earlier if you can finish it. These are about 45 minutes again. We would go through all the artifacts and reflections, and then schedule again when you're ready. We really need to schedule these prior to August 9th in order to be ready to be done by this semester. And then again, schedule this out with the cooperating administrator and myself. We review the artifacts and reflections. Very similar, the cooperating administrator completes evaluation prior to the meeting, and then the supervisor completes evaluation following the meeting. As a reminder, all artifacts must have a 3 to meet a proficiency in order to pass this course. Again, this is a pass or fail course. This is not a graded course. The final meeting with the cooperating administrator cannot be any later than August 9th, and the cooperating administrator will need to finish their evaluation by August 16th if they are not finished prior to it. But again, we're both going to really encourage the cooperating administrator to finish those prior to any meetings. So there is an email to cooperating administrators. It's linked here, but it's also in the resources. So you can just see what I send to the cooperating administrator, and you can see what expectations are put out there for them. Okay, so you've reached the end of this important module towards the end of semester 2, going into semester 3. Again, if you have any questions or any concerns or anything like that, reach out through private discussion or by email. Thanks for all you do, and I look forward to practicum semester as I get to actually know you better, because we will be meeting at least over Zoom for twice over the summer. All right, have a great semester.